Good afternoon, everyone. For those people who just joined us, welcome to the 24 hours worldwide design conversations. And I am Beatrice Villari. I am Associate Professor at Politecnico di Milano, and I am the co-director of the Specializing Master in Service Design. So I'm more than happy to have a conversation with Paolo Ciuccarelli from Boston.
Hey, good
Ciao,
morning,
Paolo.
everyone. Ciao, good morning.
Good afternoon here from Milan.
Yeah, and good morning from here. I'm out of Boston now. I'm in Cape Cod, actually, so enjoying some days of kind of holidays, more or less. But
good to know.
Having a break after the bad news that are coming around.
It helps a lot. So it helps a lot. This is the first time we met after you moved from Milan to Boston. Yeah, and also this is the first time I'm back to the office after the lockdown. So it was an interesting adventure. Okay. So welcome and thanks a lot for joining us. And you shared with us a very interesting world that is very, very linked to what we have faced. We had faced in this journey. That is datum. Yeah, datum. So you are an expert about data and data visualization, and you worked along also to reinforce this topic inside the design discipline. And why did you choose and why did you share with us the word datum?
Yeah, I decided to use let's say the singular or original version of the more common data term. I mean, we are much more familiar with the term data, but actually it's the plural of datum. That is also the reason I wanted to start with that. So using the Latin, the original language, is that we often forget that data is not what the original term means. So if you stick to the etymology, datum means something that is given, that it's granted. But the truth is that data is a construction. So we as human beings, we produce data. We select a certain phenomenon. We use a certain sensor. We with a certain process, we collect data. So it's the opposite that of given and granted. It's something that we produce on purpose. And that's something that is very often forgotten, and that can lead really to a lot of misunderstandings on what data means. So when we search for insights and we try to make sense of data, and we forget this, I think this can really lead to some very, very bad issues. And we saw that in this very difficult time of the pandemic. So of course, many different organizations started to produce data around the issue. So different countries started to count cases, to count death and all these bad things. But the truth is that every country was producing data in different ways, but nevertheless, we were putting all this data in the same frame and presenting them as equal, but they were not. I mean, a death in a certain country could have been a person that was, sick for other reasons, and then when he died or she died, also had, tested positive on COVID-19, but the reason could have been something else. But in other countries was just the people that really died for that cause that were counted. And so, but you don't see that when you see data. I mean, you see all these trend lines putting those data into the same frame, but you know nothing about the nature and the origin of the data that you see in the screen or in the paper, and that's a problem. So that's why I wanted to go back to the roots of the term, because Yeah, it's true. The meaning, the original, the etymology says that datum is something that is given, is granted, but actually it's not. And so I really hope that that's something that we will remind after, hopefully soon, this crisis will be over. So let's not forget what we are learning it away from in terms of data. So data is something that we construct, and knowing and seeing something about how the data has been constructed, that's really, really important to, if you really want to make sense of it. Yeah, so that's why I choose that term. So this Latin, among all the different languages that you have represented here in the conversation, I wanted to introduce that term in a kind of a slightly different way. So that's the reason.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Paolo. I think that in this period, data and sharing data, producing data, building information also about data was a hot topic. It was also a controversial issue, So I think that your world is crucial for this conversation, and also how to link such topics to the design field is another issue that we can discuss.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are several reasons for design to be part of the world of data where actually design was not present at the origin. So it took some years, but I think Politecnico contributed a lot especially with the work of the Density Design Research Lab to create this link between design and data. And I think there is no the situation now. It's kind of proving the need of this link between because I said before, I mean, data are constructed by human beings, data are used and consumed by human beings, but the human was actually not in the loop. And what better discipline than design to bring the human in the loop of data processes? And that's what our discipline does. So we are supposed to understand people and to mediate between technologies and their needs. And so that's what design can do now when in a time when these needs are becoming really, really evident. They are emerging both from the crisis, but also from the technologies themselves that are helping us in focusing more on the human. If you think to big data, for example, or the algorithms that we have nowadays for artificial intelligence, they all speak about human issues. I mean, biases, for example, is one of the main problems we have with algorithms. It's about human beings and our nature as human beings and how we frame data and algorithms when we produce them. So that's why design is needed to, in a way, reconnect the human beings with the processes where the human beings was not present. And so, it's not yet done, but it's a process that we started in a way 15 years ago, but it's under construction. It's really, really urgent now.
Yeah, I agree. So, but linking to what you are saying now, so data are often perceived as something cold. So, and something that is not so empathic. So, in your opinion, are there any opportunities to make data more human-centered, also from, of course, a design perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. With what you say, it's really, really important. I mean, of course, data. Well, more than cold, I would say, by nature, data, but also the representation, how we see data, it's in a way cold because we use. We have been using the language of mathematics and geometry to represent data, and of course, it's an abstraction. So it's a scientific language. It's something that we learn at school. In courses of mathematics, geometry, and so it's certainly a kind of a reduction of what we perceive as there is a phenomenon. You have data, and then there's representations that we use to try to understand the data and the phenomenon, and they are based on languages that are pure abstraction from mathematics. And so, of course, it looks we can say cold, but what I'm more concerned about is this language is, of course, creates a distance or a barrier, especially for people that are not experts of these languages. And so when you have, you want to talk with people, let's say again, during this crisis, governments and institutions, they had to talk with people about what was happening. And data, of course, were really useful because they could, help us understanding what was going on. But the language we used, was the typical abstraction that we use as experts when we analyze data. And so you have seen all these charts, trend charts and all these bar charts and, spreading all over in newspaper. And some people, many people try to engage with these representations of data because they wanted to know. They wanted to know what was happening and how things were evolving. So they were really eager to get this knowledge, but sometimes this language could be a barrier. And so, that's, again, what communication design especially can do. Try to work on these languages without, forgetting the conventions, because, there is a lot of knowledge around how to represent data, to maintain integrity and to make a representation that is, consistent and solid scientifically, but also trying to connect with people, especially non-experts, to convey also something about the phenomenon behind, because this coldness sometimes means that you tend to forget, in the abstraction, you forget what this data stands for. So on the other side, often you have people, human beings, you have something bad that is happening. There's very, very, something very warm, to say the opposite, something that is really, it's blood and flesh. It's something that hurts, and it's people feelings and people, and then you have these abstractions. So if we can, I think, as designers, we have the tools and the competencies to create a language that is closer to both the person that is reading the visualization and the phenomenon that you have on the other side. And so without, again, forgetting or reducing the knowledge and the conventions we have to, to make data representations solid and valid, from a scientific point of view, but in the same time, or together, also connecting what they stands for, because that's something that it's really crucial if you want to engage people. People that are not experts, they sometimes they don't read data, and so because of this distance, of this barrier of the language. So language is very important, and designers, especially communication designers, can help a lot with that. So creating the new language we need, for example, to represent the certain degrees of uncertainties that we have nowadays in the data, and it's natural. It's one of the new features of the big data we have now, but on the same time, it's also something that we don't know exactly how to represent, especially when you have multiple levels of uncertainty at the same time. It's difficult because if you use the visual variables we are familiar with, it's really tricky to visualize that uncertainty. So it's something that we can help doing. It's open as a field, and but reconnecting with the humanity of as an opposite of the coldness. You were talking about is important, and also to address some of the. So this uncertainty is something that is usually not embedded in the language, as what I was talking about. You see a straight line, you see something that's very precise, it looks very accurate. But sometimes it's not, because maybe the protocol we use or the process we use to capture this data was not so exact. Usually there is a margin of error in whatever is the process we put in place. So these are also other spaces for design to.
There's room to experiment. Absolutely. So, but you mentioned the terms of uncertainty, and uncertainty is linked to a word that, in my opinion, is complexity. And data are often perceived and related to the idea of complexity. In a past interview, you mentioned an Italian book, La sfida della complessità, like the challenge of complexity, that reflects on how complexity begins from the uncertainty of knowledge. So in this period, the COVID-19 period, we perceived a lot this uncertainty. And at the same time, we needed to reduce the complexity to understand the world in which we are living. So in your opinion, how can data be used to make such complexity more accessible, or what we need to design data for complexity or in the complex system?
Yeah, that's actually, I think this is the trade-off we live every day with data visualization. So especially as the more we are aware of the complexity of the phenomena we are trying to represent, the more we feel this trade-off. It's like a paradox, to try to represent the complexity, but at the same time using something that is by nature reductive and made for quick decisions or quick analysis. And so it's trade-off that we try. I personally, but I think all the people I've been working with, I mean, we try always to to play with this trade-off and to be as much as possible, to retain as much as possible the complexity of the phenomenon, but at the same time, taking into account the need of making a decision or getting an insight in a certain amount of time. So it's necessary. Unfortunately, we have more and more evidence of the complexity of every phenomenon around us, and at the same time we have less and less time to make decisions. Again, if we think to the crisis now, everyone has to react very quickly in order to stop the spread and so on. So you had on one side a very complex phenomenon, especially the pandemic. It's global. Everything is connected through the infrastructures, and so it's certainly one of the most complex phenomenon you can imagine. And then on the other side, you had to act quickly. And so what happens is that often you give priority to time, and then so you tend to use very, very reductive visualizations, and it's hard actually, but I think should be our mission to try to reach as much as possible those reductive visualizations in order to enable a quick decisions, but maybe slowing a little bit, but for something that you can get. I mean, it has to be clear what you get when you try to add some complexity to the visualization. But it's really like living in a paradox but yeah, it's like a fight, against the natural intrinsic reductionism of some visualizations, or most of the visualization we use to make decisions, and the awareness of complexity that we have more and more, especially with this kind of phenomenon. If you think to climate change is the same, so there is it's evident how certain visualizations are not able to convey all the complexity of the phenomenon. Sometimes they lead to even to bad decisions, because you see just very tiny portions, but slices of the phenomenon. You're not able to have the big picture and to see the connections. And that's it's something that is we have all the data. For example, for the pandemic, we had all the data. We had the competencies to visualize them, but we were not ready because we were not using them. Then every government was in a rush to get back to those data and to try to visualize them, but they were not doing that, and so they were not prepared to manage the so it's challenging. It's sometimes very you feel frustrated about this kind of impossible task of mapping the complexity, but and uncertainty is certainly it's part of it. So it's one of the features of complex systems, and yeah, I mean there's a branch of literature that deals with that.
Yeah. As designer, we need to face such topics, and we live in a complex world, and we live in intertwined ecosystems. So I think that we really need to face with these issues, and also in this case, we have room for experiments. And
as designers, man, we are meant to, as by nature, to be, we are the ones that should be able to play with ill-defined problems, with problems, and so what's better than design to help with this uncertainty?
Absolutely, we are ready. We are ready to do that. So, but I found interesting your suggestions and your in this conversation about the the reflection, more rather than a suggestion, the reflection about the difficulties for governments, for example, to face rapidly with this huge change that had an unexpected impact on governments, on public services, and of course on our lives. So in this period, an interesting topic is emerging. That is the use of data to design better policies. So the use of data in governments, for example, and the use of data in a more collaborative way for public sector. So, for example, topics such as anticipatory governments are now interesting topics to reflect about, and it's interesting to reflect about data, how to use data to envision new ways, also to interact between the governments and the citizens. So I think it's an interesting area to discuss. So, in your opinion, what is the role of data, and how can we use data for policy, and how this idea of data for policy can evolve?
I mean, that's essential. I mean, if it's not my opinion, I mean, it's even the European Union invested in the recent years a lot of money into research around how to use data, big data in policy making. That's the future, even the present. But there is a huge problem with that. You say it should be a dialogue between the government and the citizen, but the problem is that the citizens, they cannot be, more often than not, they don't have the skills, the competencies, the literacy, as we say, to have a real dialogue with the government. And so the government can sometimes use data also as a way to to direct and to orient the action. I know that's what they are meant to do. I mean, to direct and orient but in a way that you may not be able to understand. So I think that in order to have what you're talking about, we need absolutely to rise the level of data literacy in citizens, because otherwise no real dialogue, no constructive dialogue is possible. If I can share a picture just to talk about, data literacy and what this could be about.
If you have picture, please share with us. You can, for sure.
I'd like to show you something. If
it's always interesting to have pictures.
Yeah, if you can show, I mean, there's probably, if you see that picture is, that's a government, actually a president of a government that is sharing some data. And, it looks like a very simple bar chart, very precise, very accurate. And but unfortunately, it's not really depicting the phenomenon behind correctly. I mean, you see, it seems that there is a big gain of jobs in May 2020, against other gains in history. But then if you are a little expert, like you don't have to be a statistician, but if you combine all the data and then you see that this increase in May was big in the other chart, but if you put together data about unemployment before the increase, it looks really different. So this is just an example of how, and you can fix the chart that the president of a government produced, but if you know, how to play with data, how even very simple charts like a bar chart can be a misrepresentation of a phenomenon, and but this kind of dialogue actually is not possible with citizens, because there is a lack of even the basics skills and concepts on statistics and data. So that's really something that I think it's necessary. So there cannot be any policy making process that lead to positive outcomes without increasing and investing in rising the culture of data in citizens. I think it's important. Otherwise, we are all in the hands or of others without very little possibility to. And that's again, I think, another space for design to create interfaces for people. Yeah, I mean for helping them engaging with data, creating the right interface, and I mean all this. It's a process that has to be constructed with all the different touch points, and that's again room for designers.
Yeah, and also about people participation or citizens participation. I think that it is also linked, to this issue, because I think that we need to frame a more collaborative way to also build data or to interpret data, because sometimes these such collaborations are very weak, although in the private sector, but in the public sector, I think that we need we can work a lot on this.
Yeah, something like public data labs, for example, and spaces, and spaces now it's tricky, but virtual spaces where people can gather with experts or with other citizens, maybe active citizens, and to understand data together, have some training, have some tools, open tools, of course. That's something that we started a conversation years ago with in Milano with the government, local government, but it's difficult. I think there is a lot of space for improving in that direction.
But we would use a positive approach, and
we would insist. We have to insist.
Exactly. That we can work on that also together, also with other disciplines, for example. So I think we have almost 1 minute to end this very, very interesting conversation. So how can we end? So if you have some links to other words, because we are sharing different words in this conversation. So if you have links to suggest other words with that.
Absolutely, the one term that is the one that I used for the event for the launch of the Center for Design I'm directing at Northwestern University. The title of the event was Human by Design. So human, I think, is the word and the term that I would like to see, more and more connected to data, or datum, as we said at the beginning. Yeah, that's absolutely the term.
Wow! I think it's let's say we discussed, also on this idea of how to become more human. So our time is expired. So Paolo, good luck for your new role, and
thank you
as director. So see you. I hopefully see you in Milan again soon. Un abbraccio.
Yeah, it's only in the hands of the governments now.
Yes, take care. And
bye.
Ciao.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.